No one in the yard understood what was happening when the new inmate stepped through the gate. But 10 seconds later, everyone felt they had just witnessed the beginning of something that would change Red Ridge forever. The scene was so unreal, it looked staged. A massive guard in a green uniform, grabbing the newcomer's head with one hand while lifting his leg, clearly trying to turn the guy into an example in front of the entire yard. But the strangest part wasn't the attack, it was the inmate's calm. The sun scorched the gravel. The dry ground reflected the heat, making everything harsher, suffocating, tense. The inmates in blue watched with hardened stares. Those in orange stayed frozen, curious. There was that charged, quiet expectancy that only appears when everyone feels something is seconds away from blowing up. On any other day, a veteran guard roughing up a newcomer would be nothing new. But today, something was different. The new inmate didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't call for help. He just kept walking, even with that giant hand crushing down on his hair, as if the pressure were nothing more than a minor nuisance. It didn't make sense. Anyone else would have stumbled, yelled, tried to defend themselves or begged. But him, not a single sign of fear or desperation. The guard's strength was obvious. He was the kind of man who intimidated people just by breathing. Everyone knew him for enforcing order with an aggressive posture, but right there, for the first time, it felt like his movements were being ignored. The newcomer walked as if he had calculated every step in advance, as if he'd trained for situations far worse than this, and that detail did not go unnoticed. Inmates began trading quick glances. Something was off, very off. It looked like the guard was trying to humiliate a man who simply didn't register the attempt. Someone who had already faced real threats, real danger, real enemies. The difference was in the newcomer's eyes. Blank on the surface, razor sharp underneath. He didn't see himself as a victim. He didn't see himself as someone being attacked. To him, this moment was small, insignificant. And that kind of composure did not exist in Red Ridge. The guard pressed harder, trying to provoke anything. A reaction, a hint of weakness. His raised knee made it clear he was about to shove the newcomer to the ground, maybe force him into total humiliation. But no one imagined the real reason behind that apparent submissiveness. The new inmate needed to observe. He needed to read the yard. He needed to see who was watching and who was ready to strike. Because despite appearances, he wasn't just another man doing time. He hadn't been sent to this prison by chance. He wasn't fragile. He wasn't naive. He wasn't an easy target. He was an operative, an undercover specialist, trained to work in silence, trained to endure extreme pressure, trained to take down enemies before they even realized what had happened. His mission started right there, on that burning yard, in the exact moment everyone assumed he was just the new guy. And while the guard tried to intimidate him, he was analyzing every face, every stance, every potential threat, every possible future ally. A cold, precise scan, the kind only someone highly trained could perform while under attack. The men in blue kept watching, some leaning forward for a better view. Those in orange stayed still and silent, but they all felt the same thing. This newcomer wasn't normal. Nothing about him fit the role of a victim. He seemed too strong on the inside, too controlled, too prepared. Then before the guard could shove him to the ground, something tiny happened, so subtle many didn't catch it. The newcomer stopped completely, feet planted, shoulders aligned. His entire posture changed, not aggressively, but with such firmness that the guard felt unexpected resistance. A strange, invisible block, as if he'd just grabbed hold of a concrete pillar. And in that instant, the entire yard went silent. No one said a word, but everyone understood. That man would not be crushed. He would not be humiliated. He would not be dominated by anyone. The guards were trying to intimidate the new inmate, but they didn't yet know the truth. He was an elite agent, and when the moment came, he would crush every threat that needed to be crushed. And that silence was only the beginning. The yard at Red Ridge Penitentiary had always been divided by invisible lines no one dared cross. They weren't painted on the concrete, weren't written in any rule book, but every inmate knew exactly where they were. The men in blue owned the tables near the entrance. The ones in orange ruled the far side, where the building's shadow offered a sliver of relief from the heat. Guards paced between those two worlds with stiff shoulders and hard eyes, believing, maybe naively, that they were in full control. But on that particular day, something broke the unspoken balance. The presence of the new inmate was shifting the weight of the entire prison, and he hadn't spoken a single word. His posture alone, the calm, the quiet resistance, was enough for everyone to realize he wasn't a regular man. And in Red Ridge, anything that didn't fit the pattern meant danger. With the guard's heavy hand still pressing against his head, the inmates kept their eyes locked on every detail. Among the men in blue sat a bearded inmate with a steel, steady gaze, known for never tolerating injustice, but also smart enough not to fight battles that weren't his. He leaned forward over the table, studying the newcomer with genuine interest, trying to figure out who or what he was. The inmates in orange watched with a colder sort of curiosity, not because they enjoyed the scene, but because they were used to judging a man's worth by how he handled pressure. And this newcomer, he was enduring a test none of them could have passed without losing control. There was something happening, something much bigger than a guard roughing up a fresh inmate. Even the prison itself seemed to react. The air grew heavy. Every breath echoed against the aging concrete walls. The barbed wire fence reflected the sunlight in a harsh, almost symbolic glare, like a border between chaos and order, or between what the guards believed they knew and what was about to be revealed. The guard's behavior drew attention too. He was known for never hesitating, for seeing himself as the alpha of the yard. He prided himself on keeping discipline with an intimidating presence. But in that moment, as he held the newcomer down, something flickered in his eyes. Not fear, not yet, but a quiet uncertainty, as if his instincts were warning him that this situation wasn't what it looked like. The new inmate didn't speak, didn't complain, didn't protest. He simply took a deep breath and held his balance with perfect control. His body looked relaxed, but there was a precise tension beneath the surface. The kind of tension you only see in someone trained to command every muscle. He wasn't frozen, he was waiting, and only those with enough experience could recognize the difference. The prolonged silence started to unsettle the yard. In a place where fights usually erupted in seconds, the fact that no one moved, no one yelled, no one interfered, only made it clearer that something massive was building. A few inmates whispered under their breath, short, shaky murmurs. He's not reacting. Who is this guy? Something's off. But no one stepped closer. It was like watching a wild animal no one had ever seen before. Fascinating, dangerous, unpredictable. And while the tension thickened around him, inside the newcomer's mind there was only calculation. He scanned every guard in the tower, every inmate at every table, every camera angle, every possible exit route. He knew exactly how many seconds he would need, how many steps he'd have to take, how many people could attempt to interfere. This wasn't a moment of humiliation. It was a map, a full reconnaissance of territory, a strategic reading of the battlefield, and he accomplished all of it without moving a single finger. The guard's irritation mixed with an urgent need to reassert dominance. The newcomer's lack of reaction was an insult. He needed to show who ran this place, needed to remind the other guards and the inmates that he was still the predator here. But every single person watching already understood the truth. The real predator was someone else. The new inmate may have looked ordinary, short, expressionless, calm, but nothing about him fit the mold of Red Ridge. He carried himself like someone who'd been in far worse places, someone who had stared down real danger. A man who had learned to adapt in seconds, to watch silently, to act only when absolutely necessary, and that kind of discipline isn't learned in an ordinary life, not on the streets, not in gang wars. It's learned in training, real training, professional training. Training reserved for people who get sent to places that don't appear on official records. The guard didn't know that. The inmates didn't know that. But the audience watching the video, they were getting closer to finding out. Because that day, Redridge didn't just receive another prisoner. It received someone carrying a hidden past, a highly trained operative, infiltrated, prepared to dismantle whatever needed to be dismantled to complete his mission. And what happened next would prove it. When the veteran guard realized the newcomer's silence was drawing too much attention, his expression shifted from irritation to something more serious. The entire yard was watching. The men in blue kept their eyes locked on the scene. The ones in orange didn't even blink. And the other guards scattered around the area were alert, not because they planned to intervene, but because they knew that veteran hated being challenged. The new inmate remained still, moving just enough to avoid being yanked backward. The guard's heavy hand pressed down on his head, trying to bend him, trying to break his posture, trying to force a reaction. But what he got was the exact opposite. The more force he used, the clearer it became that the newcomer stayed centered, controlled, almost unfazed. That was what truly bothered everyone watching. He wasn't fighting back. But he wasn't giving in either. He was simply existing inside the attack, as if the whole thing were irrelevant. The tension kept tightening, like a rope about to snap. "Hey, look at this," one of the blue uniformed inmates muttered, eyes glued to the scene. "This guy's either insane or seriously trained," another said as he crossed his arms, trying to make sense of it. The guard decided to escalate. If the newcomer wouldn't react, then he'd be humiliated. In the veteran's mind, respect was earned through fear. With a sudden jerk, he yanked the newcomer by the hair and tried to drive his knee forward, as if he were about to slam him onto the ground. It was a technique he'd used dozens of times to put inmates in their place. A domination move that almost always worked. But with this newcomer, something went wrong. The motion didn't take him down. The newcomer's body locked in the exact spot, steady as bedrock. The guard felt it immediately, felt the resistance, felt that the body in front of him was far more solid than it looked. And that detail sparked the first warning sign. The inmates caught it instantly. The bearded man in blue, who had been observing from the start, leaned forward. His eyes narrowed, recognizing that stance. He'd seen it before, in men who didn't belong in regular prisons, in people with advanced military training, in fighters who could fight without actually fighting. Meanwhile, the younger guards watched with anticipation, some almost grinning, certain the newcomer was finally about to hit the ground. But as the seconds ticked by, their smiles faded. Because the man didn't fall. He didn't bend. He didn't break. He simply chose when to move. And that's when the veteran's confidence began to crumble. His aggressive attack warped into something almost frantic. He applied more force, tried shifting the direction of the shove, but nothing worked. It was like trying to move a buried tree trunk. "Move," the guard growled, demanding submission. No reply, no flinch, no reaction. The silence was the real defiance. Frustration began to take over the veteran. And when someone used to dominating loses emotional control, the danger rises for them. But the newcomer kept observing. Every breath, every shift in the guard's feet, every muscle tightening, every camera angle, every potential witness. The prison thought it was watching an assault, but in reality, it was watching a calculation, the kind of detailed analysis only an elite operative could perform under pressure. Then something even more unexpected happened. The newcomer stopped walking altogether. His body froze in place, completely halting the guard's ability to move him. The heavy hand on his head stayed where it was, but it no longer had any effect. For the first time, the veteran felt the full resistance, and he didn't like it. The entire yard held its breath, because in that instant, the balance of power shifted. The veteran slid his foot back, preparing to push harder. But the moment he tried to force the newcomer forward, he realized he'd made a mistake. A mistake any trained operative would have spotted instantly. But he had missed, blinded by his own confidence. The guard was off balance. He had lifted his leg too high, shifted his center of gravity, extended his arm too far. It was a dangerous position for anyone, especially when facing someone who stood impossibly solid and silent. The newcomer felt it. He didn't strike, he didn't lash out, but his posture shifted a single inch, just enough for the guard to understand something was completely out of his control. 1 inch, and the entire yard understood the newcomer was letting the veteran destroy himself. The inmates exchanged tense looks. The men in blue whispered, "He's letting the guard lose. This is gonna end badly." The men in orange stayed still, watching like students in front of a master, displaying effortless precision. And then came the turning point. The guard realized he wouldn't be able to take the newcomer down. And when an aggressor loses the impact of his first strike, he loses his authority along with it. All of Red Ridge felt that shift. The veteran still didn't know, not yet, who he was dealing with, but the audience was already beginning to understand. The newcomer didn't react because he didn't need to react. He didn't fight because he didn't need to fight. He didn't speak because he didn't need to explain anything. Because in that yard, the real threat wasn't the guard. It was the man he was holding. The tension in the yard still hung in the air when the veteran guard finally let go of the newcomer's head. It wasn't a conscious retreat, it was instinct. He felt something he couldn't explain, a cold, unyielding resistance that nullified his strength. And that alone rattled the pride of a man who'd built his reputation on being feared. The newcomer took a single step forward, not as an escape, but like someone choosing exactly where he intended to go. That one step was enough to shift the entire dynamic around them. The guard, irritated and now unsettled, stepped back half a pace. Too small for anyone inattentive to notice, but large enough for the inmates to recognize what it meant. No guard steps back in Red Ridge, ever. And when one does, even by a fraction, something has changed. That something was the new prisoner. The men in blue exchanged quiet glances, and among them, the bearded inmate was the first to grasp that something far bigger was unfolding. He raised his chin slightly, without moving the rest of his body, studying the newcomer's posture. That calm, that precision, that silence, none of it belonged to Red Ridge. It was the kind of control carried only by people with hidden agendas. Among the orange uniforms, a shaved-head inmate watched with sharp, attentive eyes. He was young, but he'd already learned enough to recognize danger. He muttered under his breath to the ones behind him, "That guy's not normal." No one disagreed. Each group read the moment in its own way. Some saw a threat, others saw an opportunity. And a few, the truly dangerous ones, saw advantage, because in a place like Red Ridge, even silence becomes information. That's where the subplots began. While the veteran guard tried to compose himself, 2 younger guards traded uneasy looks. They knew their superior hated feeling challenged. They also knew he wouldn't let this slide. And their worry wasn't for the newcomer, it was for everything that would follow. Guards don't like losing face in front of inmates. And when they do, the consequences always seep through the cracks of the system. On the far end of the yard, an older blue-uniformed inmate, known for his sharp observation, cleared his throat softly. "He's not an ordinary prisoner," he said, without raising his voice. One of his peers asked, "What do you think he is?" The man answered calmly, "Whatever he is, he's not from here." It was the first time someone put into words what everyone had been feeling, and that sentence began to spread. While the inmates processed their conclusions, the newcomer stood completely still, breathing evenly, as if he had shut off any instinct to react. In his eyes there was no fear, no pride, no anger, only calculation, observation. And that posture began to attract a different kind of attention. The unofficial leaders, the ones who controlled everything that wasn't written down, the ones who knew that a slight change in behavior could signal the rise of a new power. One of the heads from the orange side stepped forward with slow, measured steps, not to get too close, not to provoke. He wasn't looking for a confrontation, not yet. He wanted to sense him, measure him, understand him. The kind of man who can always tell when a newcomer might become a key piece in the prison's internal chessboard. "Keep your eyes on him," he murmured to his crew. "That one's going to shake things up." Meanwhile, the newcomer's mind was working like a three-dimensional map. He was assembling piece by piece a full breakdown of how Red Ridge operated, identifying which inmates held influence, which ones were followers, which guards abused their power, which were more alert, which could become future problems. His training allowed him to read people in seconds, memorize patterns, map threats, interpret energy, and still look like just another face in the yard. But Red Ridge wasn't a typical environment. It was a place where even silence had echoes, where every micro-gesture triggered a chain reaction, where survival depended not only on strength, but on adaptability. And in this environment, the newcomer wasn't just adapting, he was winning. The complexity deepened when, far from the yard, a supervisor watched everything through the prison's internal cameras. He saw the guards' movements. He saw the newcomer's resistance. He saw the glances traded between inmates, and it made him frown. He didn't like surprises, especially not prisoners who shifted the prison's balance before their first hour inside. The supervisor knew he needed to find out who this man really was. He knew that kind of calm wasn't normal. He knew he had to act before it turned into something bigger, but he had no idea that it was already too late, because the agent's mission hadn't begun in that moment. It had started long before he ever walked through Red Ridge's gates. The yard still echoed with the awkward silence left behind by the veteran guard's involuntary retreat. The inmates kept watching the newcomer as if they were seeing a wild animal materialize in the middle of a desert, calm, quiet, but capable of tearing apart anything that threatened it. And it was in that dense, loaded atmosphere that the turning point began. Not with a punch, not with a shout, but with a simple, almost invisible detail. The newcomer took a deep breath. That breath, slow, controlled, deliberate, triggered something no one expected. Up until then, he'd limited himself to enduring the guard's attack while the whole yard struggled to figure him out. But in that instant, his breathing changed, and the inmate's eyes changed with it. It was a kind of silent dominance that didn't need physical strength to impose itself. The veteran realized it the exact moment the newcomer lifted his chin by a single millimeter. A gesture so tiny, anyone else would have missed it. But for men who understood confrontation, who understood body language, who understood danger, that gesture was a warning. The guard stepped back again, and this second retreat, no one could pretend not to see. The men in blue tensed. The ones in orange snapped to full alert. The younger guards swallowed hard. And the supervisor in the control room leaned forward in his chair. For the first time, everyone began to understand that the newcomer was about to do something big, something that would break the yard's unspoken rules, break the hierarchy, break the illusion that he was just a silent challenger. He no longer looked like a man trying to survive. He looked like someone who had been waiting for the exact right moment. The veteran, maybe to avoid showing weakness, stepped forward again. Trying to regain control, he took a wide step, ready to grab the newcomer by the shoulders and slam him against the concrete table. But that step was his biggest mistake. He moved too far, shifted his weight, exposed his flank, opened angles no one should open while standing in front of someone with that kind of posture. And the newcomer saw all of it. He didn't just see, he understood. And in that moment, he decided. He moved his right foot 0.5 centimeter. Nothing more. A shift so small it was barely visible, but it completely changed the axis between them. The guard didn't notice right away, but the yard felt it. It was like the air got pulled into a vacuum, like time slowed for a second, like every eye had been magnetized to that tiny adjustment, because everyone knew, even without technical understanding, that it wasn't an ordinary step. It was the movement of someone accustomed to calculating real confrontations. The veteran tried to grab him, but this time, his hand met nothing but air. The newcomer's movement was so precise, it looked choreographed, but it wasn't performance. It was technique. It was trained instinct. He leaned just enough to break the guard's attempt, keeping his hands down, never showing aggression. The motion sent the veteran stumbling 2 steps forward, fully exposed. For a moment the guard flailed, trying to regain balance, but the yard had already seen everything. The giant in the green uniform nearly fell, and the entire prison understood. The newcomer hadn't been overpowered earlier. He had allowed it. He had chosen when the guard would fail. The veteran finally caught his balance and wheeled around, furious, now visibly out of control. His wounded pride was stronger than any interest in keeping the situation stable. He didn't want to intimidate the newcomer anymore. He wanted to erase the humiliation the whole yard had just witnessed. He opened his mouth to bark some order, but the supervisor, for the first time, used the loudspeaker. "Officer Lewis, stop immediately." Silence deepened. The inmates looked upward in surprise. The younger guards exchanged nervous looks. The veteran clenched his jaw. The supervisor didn't speak publicly, almost never. The fact that he intervened before the confrontation escalated meant only one thing. He realized the newcomer was a threat. Not because he was violent, but because he had control. Too much control. Lewis inhaled sharply, trying to swallow his frustration, but before he could fully step back, the newcomer finally raised his head. His gaze, steady and serene, cut across the yard like a silent blade. He didn't look at the veteran like someone looking at an enemy. He looked at him like someone assessing a piece on a chessboard, a piece already analyzed, categorized, and dismissed. And that was worse than any physical reaction. The inmates felt it, the supervisor felt it, even the veteran felt it, because that was the kind of look men recognized as true danger, the danger that doesn't scream, doesn't threaten, doesn't posture, but simply knows. And in that moment, the entire prison realized the game had changed. The veteran was no longer the predator, and the newcomer was no prey. He was the infiltrated operative, the man who always chooses the exact moment to act, the man who was about to turn Red Ridge upside down. And that tiny gesture, that single inch of movement, was the turning point that would change everything. The supervisor's intervention over the loudspeaker froze the entire yard as if time had stopped for a few seconds. It was a sharp, direct command with no room for interpretation. But that wasn't what shocked everyone. It was why he intervened. The supervisor never stepped into yard disputes. That only happened when there was a real threat. And to everyone's surprise, the threat wasn't the veteran guard, it was the newcomer. Lewis, the veteran, took a deep breath, trying to swallow his frustration. He was used to being feared, respected, obeyed. But that morning, the entire yard had witnessed the impossible. The toughest guard in Red Ridge losing control of a confrontation with a prisoner who had arrived less than an hour ago. Not because of strength, not because of combat, but because the newcomer hadn't reacted at all, and that weighed heavier than any punch. Shame spread through his body like heat. He tried to straighten his posture, to pretend he was still in charge, but it was too late. Everyone had seen that second retreat. Even the younger guards knew what it meant. Lose morale, and you lose authority. Lose authority, and you lose the yard. As Lewis tried to pull himself together, the supervisor's voice rang out again, firmer this time. All officers, maintain immediate distance from the newly arrived inmate. Repeat, keep your distance. Whispers broke out among the inmates, even if only in short bursts. What the hell is this? Why so many orders because of him? This guy's flipping the whole prison upside down? The men in blue traded stunned looks. The ones in orange watched with calculating eyes. That order said a lot. And most importantly, it told everyone the supervisor saw something no one else had. The new prisoner remained perfectly still, as if waiting for the performance to end. His gaze swept the yard discreetly, not to intimidate, not to provoke, but to confirm everything he had already analyzed, who watched with fear, who watched with anger, who watched with respect, and who was trying to measure his value. The infiltrated agent was assembling a full picture, and every reaction added a piece to it. Guard Lewis, now flushed with rage, took 2 steps back, not because he wanted to, but because he had received a direct order. His wounded pride burned in his eyes, but the fear of defying the supervisor burned even stronger. He turned away and walked toward the tower's shadow, his mind racing for ways to reclaim the respect he had just lost. Meanwhile, the real storm was building in the inmate's eyes. The bearded man in the blue section inhaled slowly, as if trying to grasp the weight of what had just happened. He knew the prison's power dynamic well. When a guard steps back, someone else fills the gap. But the newcomer didn't move. He didn't exploit the weakness. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't try to assert dominance. And to the bearded man, that was the biggest sign of all. That man's trained, he murmured under his breath. Trained how? The younger inmate beside him asked. The kind of training that teaches you to win without ever having to fight. The words spread silently through the blue section. On the orange side, the informal leader kept watching. He was used to sizing up dangerous men, finding weaknesses, predicting problems. But in that moment, he didn't see any weakness in the newcomer. He saw calm, intention, and something deeper, something that didn't fit a normal prisoner. He glanced at his crew and muttered, "That guy didn't come here to serve time." "What do you mean? He moves like a man who's working inside this place." No one responded, but everyone felt the truth beneath the words. The guards' reactions were revealing too. The younger ones looked confused, uneasy. The seasoned ones looked tense, like they were reassessing risks. After all, who forces a supervisor to intervene like that? The newcomer remained standing, posture steady and serene, as if the layers of tension around him didn't matter. He was waiting for something, and that patience was unsettling, because it revealed certainty, the certainty of someone who knows exactly what he's doing. Then the supervisor pushed things even further. Through the loudspeaker, his voice boomed, "All inmates, stand in holding position. No one approaches the central yard." That order was only used in situations of institutional danger. Large-scale fights, external breaches, major security failures. And now, it was being used because of one man, the agent. The inmates stiffened. The guards took their positions. And the newcomer, for the first time, lifted his head with intention, not to challenge, not to attack, but like someone marking the beginning of a new chapter. Redridge had realized it wasn't dealing with a prisoner anymore. It was dealing with someone who could dismantle the entire prison, if he wanted to. When the supervisor issued the standstill order, the entire prison seemed to hold its breath at once. Inmates instinctively stepped away from the center of the yard. Guards retreated to the edges, and the deep silence that fell over Redridge felt almost supernatural. It was as if the place, always loud, heavy, and unpredictable, suddenly recognized that the man standing at the center wasn't just a new inmate, but a phenomenon no one knew how to handle. The newcomer kept his posture straight, his gaze steady, his breathing calm. Nothing in him trembled, nothing betrayed fear. If anything, there was a solid serenity about him, one that sharply contrasted with the internal chaos everyone else was feeling. And it was in that contrast that his true growth began, not as a prisoner, but as an infiltrated agent. He knew he was being watched. He knew every step he'd taken had already shifted the prison's balance. He knew nothing would be the same from this point on, but contrary to what many believed, he hadn't come to cause destruction. His objective was infiltration, analysis, identification. He understood that to complete his mission without raising further suspicion, he'd need to adapt to the environment, rebuild his identity, and understand deeply how every force inside Red Ridge operated. That's how his growth began, not through strength, but through self-awareness. As the inmates held their positions, he surveyed the yard with sharp precision. He noted the placement of the cameras, the behavior of the younger guards, and the tension radiating from the older ones. He studied the internal gangs, watching how each reacted to his silence. This rapid assessment was essential for an undercover operative, and he mastered it better than almost anyone alive. And despite his calm appearance, his mind was working like a silent engine. Across the yard, the bearded man on the blue side watched him with a mix of respect and curiosity. He was the first inmate to recognize that the newcomer wasn't just strong, he was someone with purpose. And in places like Red Ridge, purpose means power. "That guy's different," he muttered quietly. "Different how?" a younger inmate asked. "He's not reacting to the chaos. He's using the chaos for himself." That analysis began to spread among the inmates, and that marked the first stage of the newcomer's rise in the prison. He didn't just earn respect, he earned recognition. On the orange side, the informal leader kept observing. He scratched his chin, studying every detail, every gesture, every lack of movement. Unlike impulsive leaders, he was a strategist, and strategists recognize strategists. "He didn't break the guard," he murmured to his men. "He broke the logic of the prison. That's rare." Those words hung silently in the air. He had risen in the eyes of the most dangerous faction, without lifting a single hand. Among the guards, the impact was even deeper. Lewis, the veteran, drowning in frustration, clenched his fists. He knew his authority had taken a hit, but another guard, younger, quieter, muttered under his breath, "He didn't do anything wrong. He just didn't fall." The simplicity of that sentence marked the beginning of the shift. The guards started to realize the newcomer wasn't necessarily a threat. He might be an enigma that demanded respect. But the supervisor saw much more. In the camera room, he advanced the footage, rewound it, zoomed in on the newcomer's posture. He saw absolute emotional control, flawless physical discipline. Someone who had faced violence before. Someone who knew how to neutralize conflict without raising his voice. And the more he watched, the more certain he became. "This guy isn't a regular inmate," he whispered to himself. "He's been trained for this." The supervisor didn't know the full truth, but he was dangerously close. The newcomer, on the other hand, knew exactly what he was doing. He needed to grow inside Red Ridge without drawing excessive attention, but he couldn't be seen as weak either. He needed to adapt to the role assigned to his mission, shaping his new identity within that brutal microcosm while safeguarding his real purpose, and every look directed at him was a brick in that construction. Without speaking, without reacting aggressively, he was evolving. And that's what separates trained men from ordinary ones. They grow in the shadows, they strengthen in silence, they win before the fight even starts. When the supervisor finally gave the order to release the yard again, the tension still clung to the air. Inmates returned to their tables, but none dared turn their backs on the newcomer. The men in blue watched him as a potential ally, the ones in orange as a potential threat, the guards as a genuine risk. And the newcomer calmly stepped back and sat on the most isolated bench in the yard. No hurry, no fear, no hesitation. That marked the beginning of the second stage of his rise. He stopped being just the new inmate and became the invisible force Red Ridge didn't yet understand, but everyone already felt. When the newcomer finally sat alone on the isolated bench in the yard, the motion seemed far too simple for the impact it created. But inside Red Ridge, every detail spoke louder than words. The sudden calm, the guards stepping back, the tense looks from the inmates. Everything showed that the prison's balance had shifted, and every bit of that shift revolved around one man. The sun hammered the concrete, yet the new inmate looked untouched by the heat, as if his body had grown so accustomed to pressure that nothing fazed him anymore. His hands rested on his thighs, his gaze lowered, appearing almost at rest. But his senses were sharper than ever. This was the most delicate phase, preparation. He knew what had just happened wouldn't be forgotten anytime soon, not by the guards, not by the inmates, not by the supervisor. And that was exactly what marked the beginning of the real game. Now, his name, or lack of one, was the subject of conversation. His behavior was under scrutiny. His posture was being examined. He had become the center of an ecosystem that constantly balanced itself between violence and fear. But he wasn't afraid. And that was what unsettled everyone the most. As he remained seated, the inmates returned to their tables with tense, jerky movements. Each group whispered, analyzed, and interpreted what had happened. And those interpretations were already branching out. On the blue side, the bearded man motioned for his crew to gather. They formed a subtle circle around him, not for protection, but for strategy. "Watch him!" the bearded man said, eyes on the newcomer. "He's not trying to blend in, not trying to show off. He waits. He calculates." One of the younger inmates frowned. "And that's bad for us?" "No, that's dangerous for anyone who thinks they understand Red Ridge," he replied. "Men like that change the course of things." The blue group understood that silent behavior could mean one of two things: an extremely valuable ally, or the worst enemy anyone could have. On the orange side, the informal leader had his own circle. He leaned forward on the table, arms resting on the metal surface, and spoke in a low voice. "That man isn't ordinary. And when someone like that walks in, the prison becomes a stage." "A stage for what?" one of his subordinates asked. The leader's answer was simple: for a confrontation bigger than anyone here imagines. It was the first time someone mentioned a bigger confrontation, and no one doubted it. Because despite the newcomer's silence, the environment felt like boiling water moments before it spills over. But the attention wasn't only on the inmates. In the surveillance room, the supervisor watched everything with almost surgical precision. He fast-forwarded frames, paused images, analyzed every angle. What bothered him most wasn't that the newcomer had resisted the guard. It was how naturally he had done it. No strain, no panic, no desperate survival instinct. "He's too disciplined," the supervisor muttered. "Too trained." And so, he made a decision. The newcomer would not be treated like a regular inmate. He needed closer monitoring. Meanwhile, Officer Lewis stood alone in a corner of the yard, drowning in his own shame. His entire career had been built on intimidation. That was his role, his signature, his weapon. But that day, he had been exposed. He couldn't accept that a newcomer, without lifting a finger, had broken his authority. "I'll fix this," he growled to himself. And when a prideful man makes a promise to himself, the danger multiplies. From the isolated bench, the newcomer watched Lewis without looking directly at him. He knew the veteran wouldn't let this go. He knew men like him needed to reassert their dominance. He knew a reaction was coming, and he knew he needed to be ready to use it to his advantage. The build-up to the climax wasn't only in the overall tension. It was in the invisible alignment of each piece. Anxious inmates, attentive leaders, suspicious guards, a worried supervisor, a humiliated veteran, and an undercover agent waiting for the exact moment. The entire prison was like exposed gunpowder, and all it needed was a spark. With the experience he carried, the newcomer knew he didn't need to attack to win. He didn't need to provoke to dominate. He only needed to wait, because the prison itself would bring him back to the center of the storm. And that moment was approaching. When the metallic bell echoed across the yard, signaling the shift change, some inmates pushed their tables back. Others jumped to their feet. The noise broke the heavy silence, but it didn't lessen the tension. If anything, it amplified it. This was only the warning. The calm was ending, and the confrontation everyone feared and anticipated was finally drawing near. The metallic bell that echoed across the yard felt like the warning before a silent storm. Red Ridge took a collective breath, like a caged beast preparing to lunge, and every inmate felt the pressure rise, even though nothing had happened yet. The newcomer stayed on the same bench, unmoving, as if he were detached from the tension tightening around him. But everyone knew he wasn't ignoring anything. He was waiting. The guards from the next shift entered through the main gate with firm steps, but there was unease in their eyes. Many had already heard what happened earlier. No one liked the idea of an inmate, especially a newcomer, undermining Lewis's authority, even indirectly. That kind of disruption threw the whole prison off balance, and when a prison loses its balance, everything can collapse. Lewis appeared moments later. His hardened expression did nothing to hide what he was feeling: shame, anger, and a burning desire to reclaim what he had lost. He walked with heavy steps, ignoring the looks from other guards. He didn't want pity. He wanted redemption, and in that moment, he saw only one way to get it back: confront the newcomer in front of everyone. The inmates noticed immediately. The tension shifted. The air got heavier. It was as if the yard could smell blood, not literal, but emotional. The bearded man on the blue side murmured, "It's happening now." His group nodded in silence. No one looked away. The leader on the orange side folded his arms and watched with calculated interest. He didn't see this as just a fight. He saw opportunity, a shift in power, a potential alliance, or the start of a new war. And the supervisor, watching from above, widened his eyes as he saw Lewis heading straight for the newcomer. He grabbed the radio tightly. "Lewis, maintain distance. Do not approach him. Repeat, do not approach." But Lewis was far beyond listening. He wasn't running. He wasn't yelling. He advanced with the dangerous calm of a wounded predator. The newcomer lifted his head slowly, not like someone bracing for an attack, but like someone acknowledging that the final piece of the board was being moved into place. Lewis stopped a few steps away. The inmates froze. The guards hesitated. The supervisor kept shouting through the radio, but Lewis switched off his transmitter. The veteran took a deep breath, eyes locked on the newcomer. "You think you challenged me?" he said, voice low but trembling with tension. "You think you can walk in here and disrespect me in front of everyone?" The newcomer said nothing. He didn't need to, and that silence for Lewis was more insulting than any answer. With a sudden burst, faster than before, Lewis lunged forward, reaching for the newcomer's collar. It was a direct, aggressive attack that no ordinary inmate would ever avoid, but the newcomer was not ordinary. The moment Lewis's arm shot forward, the agent's body moved as if he'd seen it coming hours ago. There was no violence, no strike, only precision. Precision so clean it looked choreographed, but it was pure professional instinct. The newcomer leaned his torso just slightly, slipping out of the attack. Lewis stumbled past him, and in the split second, the guard lost his balance. The agent took a single calculated sidestep, placing Lewis exactly where he wanted him, vulnerable, exposed, and completely detached from his center of gravity. The yard held its breath. Lewis tried to turn, but the newcomer used only 2 fingertips on his forearm. No aggression, just precise pressure applied at the exact point. It was a professional technique, agent technique. The technique of someone who understood the human body like a combat blueprint. Lewis felt the pressure, and his knee buckled. The green uniformed giant hit the concrete, not unconscious, not injured, not destroyed, but defeated. By a single movement. The inmates erupted into murmurs. The guards froze, The supervisor put his hands on his head, and the newcomer, calm as ever, released Lewis's forearm and stepped back, giving him space, while demonstrating absolute control. Lewis remained on his knees on the scorching concrete, breathing hard, humiliated again, but this time permanently. He couldn't stand quickly. His mind was still trying to process what had just happened. And the newcomer stood tall, untouched, not provoking, not mocking, not attacking, just existing. And still overpowering. The inmates understood before the guards did. He dropped Lewis without even hitting him, one of the blue uniforms whispered. That's impossible. Not for someone trained. The orange leader tilted his head, fascinated. He's lethal, he murmured, and he's holding back. The supervisor finally grabbed the radio and shouted in panic, "All units to the yard now!" But it was already too late. All of Red Ridge had seen, had understood, had felt it. The guards tried to intimidate the newcomer, but he was an elite agent, and at the exact moment he chose, he crushed everyone there, not with violence, but with skill, with precision, with absolute control, and that silent, cold, devastating defeat would be remembered forever. When the reinforcement guards stormed into the yard, the scene they found wasn't one of violence or a riot or an all-out attack. It was something far more unsettling. Red Ridge's most feared guard was on his knees on the concrete, defeated without a single scratch, while the new inmate stood still and calm, as if nothing had happened. Nothing was broken, no one was hurt, and yet everyone understood that something irreversible had been shattered, the hierarchy. Two guards rushed forward to help Lewis to his feet, but he refused. His pride burned hotter than any physical pain. He didn't want hands pulling him up. He wanted answers, but no answer existed that he was emotionally prepared to accept. How could a single movement, a simple sidestep, 2 fingers on his forearm, bring a man like him to the ground? The supervisor reached the yard and stared at the newcomer with a mixture of fear and fascination. He didn't see a regular criminal. He saw a professional, someone with rare training, someone who had held back even when attacked. And that restraint said more than any show of force ever could. "Who are you?" the supervisor asked, unable to stop himself. The newcomer didn't reply. He simply held the supervisor's gaze for a second, and then looked away, as if the question were irrelevant. That silence hit harder than any answer, because the ones who don't answer are the ones who know more than they can say. Across the yard, the inmates remained silent. They had just witnessed something none of them ever expected to see inside Red Ridge. A man who didn't need to fight to win, didn't need to threaten to dominate, didn't need to speak to silence everyone around him. The bearded inmate in the blue section placed a hand on a younger inmate's shoulder and whispered, "You see that? That's it. He controls everything, without touching anything." The orange sector leader kept his eyes locked on the newcomer, studying him like an impossible riddle. "If that man wanted to take this prison," he said coldly, "no one could stop him." And it was true. The new inmate didn't create chaos. He revealed the chaos already there. He exposed weaknesses no one dared admit. He showed that power isn't in the hands that strike. It's in the mind that decides. The guards, even as they tried to regain composure, kept their distance, not out of physical fear, but out of an involuntary respect. They had seen what he could do without lifting a hand. The question now was, what would happen if he ever decided to? The supervisor let out a long, heavy breath. "Take him to the observation wing," he ordered. But the tone wasn't punitive. It was cautious. It was understanding. The agent walked where they told him to. No handcuffs, no rush, no resistance. And even then, he looked like the most dangerous man in the entire prison. Because Red Ridge finally understood, the guards tried to intimidate the newcomer. But he was an elite agent, and at the exact moment he chose, he crushed them all, not with brutality, but with absolute control. And that kind of strength, no one can stop. That night, as Redridge settled into silence, every inmate, every guard, even the supervisor found themselves thinking about the same man. The newcomer, the one who should have been fragile, vulnerable, intimidated, had rewritten the power structure of the prison with a single gesture. He didn't shout, didn't fight, didn't provoke. He simply revealed who he truly was. In the shadows of the cells, a whisper began to spread. He's not here by mistake. He's here on a mission. And everyone knew that from that day on. Nothing inside Redridge would ever be the same. If this story kept you hooked until the end, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. It helps the channel a lot. Drop a comment below telling us what you would have done in the newcomer's place. Your opinion really helps this channel grow. Share this video with someone who loves intense, twist-packed stories with powerful characters. And if you want to keep this vibe going, go watch the next video right now. There's a lot more waiting for you. Thanks for staying till the end. You're part of this journey.